The music stopped. Everyone turned to stare. My cheek was burning red where she hit me. The church was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. 130 people watched as Sarah, my new daughter-in-law, stood over me in her white dress, screaming about my apartment keys. "Give them to me now, old woman," she yelled right there at the altar. "You don't need such a big place anymore. Michael and I deserve it more than you do." My son Michael just stood there like a statue. He didn't say one word to help me. Not one word to his own mother. I picked up my glasses from the floor where they fell when she hit me. My hands were shaking like leaves in the wind. Everyone was looking at me like I was some kind of bug. Some people whispered to each other. Others looked away because they felt bad for me. But nobody helped me. Nobody said Sarah was wrong. "You're too old to live alone," Sarah kept going, fixing her pretty dress. "Michael and I need privacy to start our family. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we look for something better." Her words were like poison darts hitting my heart. For months, she had been saying mean things about my old clothes, my small car, my simple life. I stood up slowly, feeling everyone's eyes on me like burning coals. Tears ran down my face, but something inside me changed forever. That slap wasn't just on my cheek. It broke something in my heart. Before we continue, first let me thank you for watching Granny's Voice. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout out in our next video. Today's special shout out goes to Marlon Adams from Dominica. Thank you for being part of our family. Now, let me tell you my story. For years, I had lived quietly, keeping secrets that nobody knew. Not even Michael, my own son. I remembered when Sarah first came to my apartment 3 years ago. Her face looked sick when she saw my old furniture and tiny kitchen. "This is where Michael's mom lives?" she asked him, loud enough for me to hear. From that day on, every visit was like torture for me. "Margaret, you should move somewhere smaller," she told me 4 months ago during dinner. "You can't take care of such a big place at your age. Besides, Michael and I want to have babies soon. We need more space." Her fake smile didn't fool me. My son just nodded like a puppet whenever she talked. First, she said bad things about my clothes. "Margaret, don't you have anything newer to wear?" Then she talked about my car. "That old car is dangerous. You shouldn't drive it anymore." Next, she didn't like my job at the library where I worked twice a week. "Why does a woman your age still work? You should be resting instead." Each mean thing she said was like a small knife cutting my feelings. My name is Margaret Stone. I am 70 years old. All my life, I like to live simply instead of showing off. I work at the town library 2 days a week. I drive a 12-year-old car. I buy my clothes at cheap stores. To everyone, especially to Sarah, I look like a poor old lady living on a small pension. But that's exactly what I wanted them to think for many years. What none of those people staring at me knew was that my life used to be very different before my husband died. My husband, Thomas, wasn't the simple man everyone thought he was. We had chosen to live like normal people to keep our real money a secret. We wanted to protect our family's privacy. Now I understand how smart that was. As I walked out of the church, people kept talking about me like a dark cloud following me. "Poor thing, she looks so weak," whispered Sarah's aunt. "The bride is right. That woman can't live alone anymore," said Michael's cousin. "She should be in a nursing home," another guest said with fake worry. Each word was like acid on my wounds. The cool air outside felt different from the hot feeling in my chest. My hands shook as I looked for my phone in my old black purse. A purse I had used for 6 years, not because I couldn't buy a new one, but because I learned to care about useful things instead of fancy ones. I called a number I knew by heart. A number I hadn't used in 2 years because I hoped I would never need it. "David, it's Margaret. I need you to come to St. Mary's Church right now." "Yes, now. Bring the papers you know about. It's time for them to learn the truth." My voice shook, but I felt stronger than I had in a long time. "Are you sure, Mrs. Stone?" David asked in his serious but worried voice. "Once we do this, we can't take it back." I looked back at the church one more time. I could see Sarah laughing with her friends, probably telling them how she put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Michael was next to her, smiling weakly. He didn't look sorry at all for what he just saw happen to me. "I'm completely sure," I said. 40 minutes, David. No more. I hung up and walked to my car with strong steps. For the first time in years, I was going to take off the mask I wore to protect my family. For the first time, they would meet the real Margaret Stone. And when that happened, when the truth hit their fake perfect worlds, they would understand what the word sorry really means. The parking lot was quiet, with streetlights making long shadows between the cars. I sat in my old car and waited. 40 minutes for their lives to change forever. 40 minutes for them to learn they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by hurting the woman who had secretly been helping them more than they could ever imagine. While I waited, memories of how I got to this moment filled my mind like a waterfall. It all started exactly 3 years ago when Michael came to my apartment with that nervous smile I knew so well from when he was little. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," he told me. There she was, Sarah, with her perfect hair, designer clothes, and that smile that didn't reach her eyes. From the very first second, I knew something was wrong. The way she looked at my apartment, checking every corner with hidden disgust, told me everything about what she really wanted. "How nice," she said as she looked at my second-hand furniture and faded curtains. Her voice meant the opposite. Michael, completely blind to what he thought was love, didn't notice how mean she sounded. That first dinner was a disaster. Sarah barely ate the food I made with love, saying she was watching her weight. When I asked about her family, she gave short answers. But she asked lots of questions about my money, which worried me. "How do you manage on a widow's pension, Margaret? It must be hard to live on so little money," she said with fake concern. What Sarah didn't know was that I was watching her just like she was watching me. Over the next few months, I started to notice things that made me very worried. Every time they visited, she would say how old everything was and how I deserved something better. But her eyes always looked at the important things. The good location of my building, the beautiful view from my window, the size of the rooms. One day, while Michael was in the bathroom, I heard her talking quietly on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, Mom. His mom's apartment is in a really expensive area. If I can get her to move somewhere smaller, we could live there until we get our own place. She's so naive, she'll probably thank us for helping her move." Her words cut me like a knife, but I kept calm when she came back to the living room, pretending nothing happened. From that moment on, every time I saw Sarah became like acting in a play. She pretended to be the caring daughter-in-law worried about me, while I pretended to be the helpless old woman who needed help. But inside, I was gathering information, watching her moves, understanding what she really wanted. It was like a chess game where we both thought we were winning. The next few months brought bigger attempts to control me. First, there were soft suggestions. "Margaret, I've seen some lovely places for people your age with all services included and no worries about fixing things." Then came stronger pressure. "You can't keep living alone at your age. It's dangerous. What if you fall and no one finds you for days?" Each argument was designed to make me feel helpless and scared. Michael, my own son, started saying the same things like a trained bird. "Mom, Sarah is right. Maybe you should think about moving to a place that's easier to manage." Watching him slowly change into that woman's puppet hurt more than any insult. The pressure got worse after they announced their wedding. Visits became more frequent but also more tense. Sarah started bringing magazines and booklets about senior living places. "I'm just looking at options for you, Margaret. I want to make sure you have the best life possible," she would say, spreading the papers on my coffee table like it was a business meeting. But I had been doing my own research. One afternoon, when they went out to plan wedding things, I decided to call an old friend who worked in real estate. "Betty, I need you to check something for me," I told her. "There's a couple very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real money situation." What I found out made me feel cold inside. Sarah and Michael were drowning in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $60,000, all paid for with credit cards and loans. The apartment they rented was about to be taken away because they couldn't pay for it. The fancy cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their whole lifestyle was fake, built on debt they couldn't handle. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the push for me to move, the constant comments about my money problems. It wasn't love that brought this couple together. It was their desperate need to find a way out of their money troubles. And my apartment, located in one of the best areas of the city, was their lifeline. The truth hit me like a punch to the stomach. My son, the boy I raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of lies and tricks. He had let an ambitious woman convince him to see his own mother as something to use instead of someone to love and respect. In the weeks before the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. "Margaret, you can't keep being so selfish," Sarah had said to me just 5 days before the ceremony. "Michael and I have given up so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." Her words no longer even tried to sound caring. It was a direct demand disguised as family help. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called David, my financial advisor and the only man I completely trusted since my husband Thomas died. "David, I need you to prepare some papers. I might very soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years." His voice became serious right away. "Mrs. Stone, are you sure this is the right time?" He warned me with the wisdom of someone who had handled my business for more than 15 years. "Once this information is public, you can't take it back. The consequences could be terrible for family relationships." But I had already decided. The family I tried to protect with my silence had chosen to betray me. And now, sitting in my car in the church parking lot, waiting for David to arrive with the papers that would change everything, I knew the moment of truth had come. 35 more minutes and Sarah, Michael, and all those guests who looked at me with pity would discover who Margaret Stone really was. 35 more minutes and their perfect worlds built on lies and greed would crumble like sandcastles. The night air moved the tree leaves around the parking lot, creating dancing shadows under the lights. It was strangely beautiful that on such a lovely night, so many illusions were about to die forever. 30 minutes had passed since my call to David, and every second felt like forever. From my car, I could see the golden lights of the church hall, hear the happy music and laughter coming through the open doors. It felt unreal to think that in just a few minutes, that celebration would turn into a nightmare for the main people involved. I closed my eyes and let the most painful memories of the last few months flood my mind. I needed to remember exactly why I had reached this point of no return. The biggest shame had happened just 3 weeks before the wedding during what Sarah called an important family meeting. She had come to my apartment, not only with Michael but also with her parents. It was a planned attack. "Margaret, we want to talk to you about your future," Sarah's mother, a cold woman who looked at me like I was a bug, had started. "We think it's time for you to make smart decisions about your life," continued Sarah's father, a big man who looked around my apartment like someone checking the value of a house. "At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary but dangerous. What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds you for days?" Their words sounded practiced, too perfect to be natural. Michael had stayed quiet through the whole conversation, nodding sometimes like a well-trained puppet. Seeing him there, sitting with a family that treated me like an obstacle, was like watching the son I raised die in front of my eyes. "Mom," he finally said in a voice I didn't recognize anymore. "They're right. Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you moved to a place more suited for your age." "Suited for my age," I repeated, feeling anger start to boil inside me. "And who decides what's suited for me?" Sarah's mother looked at her husband with a knowing glance, as if my words confirmed something they had already discussed. "Margaret, we understand this can be hard to accept, but you must think about what's best for Michael and Sarah." "What's best for them?" I said quietly, starting to understand the true size of the conspiracy planned behind my back. "And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right?" The awkward silence that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every emotional pressure. Sarah took control then, using all her tricks of emotional manipulation. "Margaret, it's not just about the apartment. It's about your well-being. We've been researching, and we found a wonderful place for people your age. It has medical services all day, social activities, prepared meals. You could make friends with people who understand what you're going through." Her fake smile made me sick. "What I'm going through?" I asked, pretending to be confused. "And what exactly do you think I'm going through, Sarah?" She looked at Michael for support before answering. "Well, loneliness, money worries, fear of not being able to take care of yourself. It's normal at your age, Margaret. You don't have to be ashamed of needing help." The boldness of this 30-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. The absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer a person with my own choices, but an obstacle to be removed with as little trouble as possible. "We've run the numbers," Sarah's father continued, pulling out a folder they had clearly prepared ahead of time. "The cost of the retirement place would be about $3,000 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough money to cover it for many years, and there would still be some left over to, well, help Michael and Sarah with their wedding expenses." There it was, the naked truth. It wasn't about my well-being or safety. It was about money. It was about turning my home into cash to pay for their expensive lifestyle they couldn't afford. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Margaret," Michael said, his voice sounding rehearsed, "we hope it won't be necessary to take stronger steps. But if your mental health gets worse to the point that you can't make good decisions." The threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate willingly, they would find legal ways to declare me unable to think properly. They had done their homework. They had planned everything. They had prepared the ground to take everything I owned by force if needed. The son I raised with so much love was sitting right there, letting strangers threaten his own mother. That night, after they left with my firm refusal, I cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, but because the illusions I had about my family had finally died. I had called David immediately. "I need you to investigate something urgently," I told him through tears. "I want to know exactly what the real money situation is for my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts, income, what they owe, everything." The results of that investigation had been devastating. Michael earned $55,000 a year as a store manager, but had debts of more than $90,000 on credit cards. Sarah worked part-time as a wedding planner, making maybe $15,000 a year, but spent like she had a high-paying job. Together, they owed more than $130,000, not counting the loans they took out for the wedding. The apartment they rented for $2,500 a month was 4 months behind on payments. The cars they drove were financed with payments that took up 70% of their combined income. Their main credit card was maxed out and they had started using cash advances to pay other debts. They were in financial freefall and my apartment represented their only hope of survival. But there was something else in David's report that completely broke my heart. For the past 8 months, Michael had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He had been asking about legal procedures to get financial power over senior citizens. My own son had been planning to take control of my money for months. The most painful information came at the end of the report. According to a private investigator David hired, Sarah had been telling her friends that she sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less handsome man because his mother had valuable property and no competing heirs. To her, marrying Michael wasn't love. It was a business investment in my inheritance. That revelation was the final straw. For weeks, I had considered simply revealing my true financial situation to them, thinking maybe the shock would make them change their behavior. But after reading that report, I understood it wasn't about money or desperation. It was about pure, calculated greed that had corrupted my son until he was unrecognizable. The days leading up to the wedding had been torture. Every phone call from Michael was new pressure to reconsider my position. Every visit from Sarah included poisonous comments about my stubbornness and selfishness. They had started treating me as if I were already a senile old woman whose opinions didn't matter. The night before the wedding, Michael had made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult." Sarah just wants what's best for all of us. His words confirmed that I had lost my son forever. The man getting married the next day was no longer the boy I raised with so much love and sacrifice. And now, sitting in my car waiting for David, I realized everything had led to this inevitable moment. It wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about justice. It was about showing them the consequences of their actions. It was about teaching them that some lines should never be crossed. 20 more minutes and everything would change forever. My hands trembled as I called Henry, my neighbor from the apartment next door. A 75-year-old man who had been a silent witness to all the tense visits of the last few months. Henry, it's Margaret. I need to ask you for a very important favor, I said, my voice shaking. Could you go to my apartment and bring me the blue folder from the third drawer of my desk? Yes, right now. It's urgent. Henry had been like a brother to me since Thomas passed away, and I knew I could trust him without questions. While I waited, I remembered the conversation I had with Henry just 2 weeks earlier. He had seen from his window when Sarah came with a house appraiser without telling me. Margaret, that girl brought a man with papers who was measuring your apartment from outside, he had told me with obvious worry in his voice. When they saw me watching, they left quickly. I don't like what's happening at all. Henry had been the first to notice the changes in Michael's behavior over the last few months. Your son doesn't say hello to me like he used to, he had observed. He used to stop and chat with me when he came to visit. Now he rushes in and out like he's ashamed of something. His words had confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap that night. The folder I had asked Henry for contained papers no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property deeds, investment records that Thomas and I had kept secret for decades. Papers that proved the poor widow living on a small pension was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. 15 minutes later, Henry appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. Margaret, what's going on? You look very upset, he asked as he handed me the papers. I explained briefly what had happened in the church, and I saw his face harden with every detail. That woman is a snake, he muttered. I always knew it. Henry, in a few minutes, a man named David will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here, I asked. And Henry, after tonight, many things are going to change. I want you to know you've always been like family to me. His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. You're family to me too, Margaret. Do what you have to do. As Henry returned to the building, I opened the folder and began to look at papers I hadn't seen in months. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $7,200,000 in an investment account. The second was the property deed for a downtown shopping center that generated monthly rent of $65,000. The third was the title to a beach house I had bought as an investment 12 years ago. Thomas had been brilliant at investments, starting with a small construction business and turning it into a silent empire. Together, we had made the decision to live modestly to protect our privacy and our family security. Visible wealth attracts problems, Thomas used to say. Invisible wealth gives you power. I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. Each paper in that folder represented years of hard work and smart decisions. The library where I worked twice a week wasn't because I needed the money, but because I liked staying active and connected to the community. The old car I drove wasn't due to money problems, but because I had learned that showing off only brings trouble. My apartment, the one Sarah wanted so badly, was actually the least valuable property in my collection. I had bought it not for its money value, but for the memories it held. It was where Thomas and I had spent our last years together, where we had planned our future, where he had passed away in my arms after a brave fight with illness. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Michael and Sarah. For the last 4 years, since my son had started having money problems, I had been secretly paying many of his bills. The credit card payments he thought came from work bonuses were actually coming from my account. The special discount on his rent that he thought he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly. Without Michael knowing, I had been supporting his irresponsible lifestyle for years. The nice apartment he lived in, the car he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding happening at that very moment had been made possible by my secret financial support. I had thought I was helping my son through a difficult time, not realizing I was financing his transformation into a person I didn't recognize. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $5,000 that had kept Michael's sinking financial life afloat. Money he thought came from work bonuses or tax refunds when in reality it was his mother desperately trying to protect him from the consequences of his bad decisions. The irony was devastating. While Sarah was shaming me for being a financial burden on their future marriage, I was literally the only reason they could afford that marriage. While they were planning to take my apartment to solve their money problems, I had been solving those problems in secret for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the church once more. The lights were still shining. The music was still playing. The guests were still celebrating. But in less than 10 minutes, David would arrive with the final papers I needed. In less than 10 minutes, I would begin cutting all the financial strings I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me. This is not revenge, I reminded myself. This is justice. This is about teaching them that actions have consequences, that greed has a price, that family is not something you can sell for money. I had tried to protect Michael from reality for too long, and that protection had corrupted him until he was unrecognizable. Headlights of a car approached the parking lot, lighting up the night with white light that temporarily blinded me. It was David, punctual as always, arriving with the papers that would change everything forever. I got out of my car and walked toward him, feeling how each step took me further from the Margaret I had been, and closer to the woman I needed to become. "Mrs. Stone," David said as he got out of his car, a legal folder under his arm. "Are you completely sure about this? Once we go in there will be no way to undo what is about to happen." I looked toward the church one last time, where my son and his new wife were probably still celebrating their victory over the useless old woman they had just shamed. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, David. It's time for them to meet the real Margaret Stone." David opened his folder under the parking lot light and began to show me the papers he had prepared with his usual efficiency. "Mrs. Stone, here is the order for the immediate stopping of all bank transfers you have been making in Michael Stone's name," he said, pointing to the first paper. "Also, here is the notice of cancellation of the lease agreement that you had secretly guaranteed. The landlord will receive this paper tomorrow morning." I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each paper represented a thread I had carefully woven for years to protect my son. And now I was cutting those threads one by one. "And the payment for the church hall?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Cancelled," David confirmed. "The deposit you guaranteed will be withdrawn tonight. They will have until tomorrow to find another way to pay." The size of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 4 years, I had been the invisible safety net that had kept Michael and Sarah's lives from falling apart. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding happening at that very moment had all been made possible by my secret financial support. And now, in a single night, I was going to withdraw all that support forever. "David, I want you to understand something," I said as I signed each paper with determination I hadn't felt in years. "This is not cruelty or revenge. This is the only way for them to learn the real value of things. For too long I protected them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection corrupted them into people I don't recognize." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Stone," David replied with genuine respect in his voice. "In my 35 years as a financial advisor, I have seen many families destroyed by greed and thanklessness. What you are doing requires more courage than most people have." His words gave me the final strength I needed to take the last step. We walked together toward the church entrance, and with each step, I could feel my heart beating faster. It wasn't nervousness I felt. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to regain. My dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of as something to be used. The music stopped suddenly when we entered the church hall. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, and I could see confusion on the guests' faces. Some recognized David immediately. After all, he had handled the financial affairs of several important families in the city for decades. His presence at social events usually meant something big was about to happen. Sarah was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Margaret?" she yelled at me from the center of the dance floor where she had been posing for photos with Michael. You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night? Her voice carried that arrogance I had come to know so well, but I could detect a note of nervousness that hadn't been there before. Ladies and gentlemen, David said in a clear, professional voice, I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Michael Stone and Mrs. Sarah Johnson. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Some guests began to pull out their phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Michael slowly approached, his face pale and his eyes full of confusion. What's going on here, Mom? He asked me in a voice that no longer sounded as confident as it had when he let me be shamed just an hour before. Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters? I could see his hands trembling slightly as he fixed his tie, a nervous habit he had had since childhood. Michael, I said in a voice firmer than it had sounded in months. This is David Wilson, my financial and legal advisor. He has come to deliver some papers that I think you will find very educational. David opened his folder and took out the first paper. Mr. Michael Stone, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother provided for your lease agreement has been immediately cancelled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to find a new guarantor or move out. All the color drained from Michael's face. Financial guarantee, he whispered, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with understanding and horror. Mom, what is he talking about? But I could see from his expression that part of him already knew. For years, he had suspected that his financial luck wasn't completely natural, but he had chosen not to ask questions because the answers might have been uncomfortable. Also, David continued without mercy, the monthly transfers of $5,000 that your mother has been making to your personal accounts have been permanently stopped. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses that you believed were being covered by other sources. Sarah let out a gasp that echoed throughout the church hall. That's impossible, she screamed, running toward us, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. Michael doesn't have a rich mother. Look how she lives. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a tiny pension. Her panic was obvious, and several guests began to whisper among themselves with increasing fascination. Finally, David said, taking the last paper from his folder, the guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been cancelled. The church management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight. His words fell on the church hall like a bomb, and I could see some guests nervously begin to move toward the exits. The realization hit Michael like a hammer. You, he whispered, looking at me with eyes that couldn't fully process what they were hearing. You've been, all this time. You've been paying for everything. His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I saw the little boy he had once been, vulnerable and confused. For 4 years, Michael, I confirmed in a voice that sounded strangely calm after the emotional storm I had been living through. 4 years in which I thought I was helping you get through a difficult time. For years in which I believed you would eventually recover and become the man I raised. For years in which I hoped you would remember the values I taught you. Sarah began to pace in circles, holding her head with increasing desperation. This can't be happening. This can't be real, she screamed as the guests watched her with a mix of horror and fascination. You're a poor old woman. You work at a library. You drive a 12-year-old car. You can't have money. Appearances can be deceiving, Sarah, I said finally, feeling decades of careful acting come to an end. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband and I believed that visible wealth attracts problems. It turns out we were right. It's just that the problems came from where we least expected them. The music had stopped completely, and the only sound in the church hall was the heavy breathing of the newlyweds and the growing whispers of the guests, who were beginning to understand they were witnessing something completely unexpected. Some were already recording with their phones, knowing that this story would become something people would talk about for years. Mom, Michael said, his voice broken. Please, there has to be some way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything. But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand how much he had lost. Not just money or financial support. He had lost his mother, the woman who had loved him without conditions for 32 years. The only way to fix this, Michael, I replied, was not to break it in the first place. The silence in the church hall became deafening. 130 guests held their breath as they processed what they had just heard. Sarah stood frozen for the first time all night, her eyes moving between David, the papers, and my face, as if trying to find a crack in the reality that was falling apart around her. Michael just stared at me with an expression I will never forget. A mixture of shock, late understanding, and complete horror. "Mrs. Stone," David said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "would you like me to read the full financial details?" His question hung in the air like a sword over the newlyweds' heads. I could see several guests moving closer, fascinated by the drama unfolding before their eyes. "Please, David," I replied with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "I think everyone deserves to know the full truth." Sarah tried to interrupt with a desperate scream, but David raised a hand and continued with the precision of a doctor performing delicate surgery. "Over the last 48 months, David began, looking at his papers, Mrs. Margaret Stone has transferred a total of $240,000 to cover the living expenses of her son, Michael Stone, and his fiancée. This includes $60,000 for rent payments, $58,000 for credit card payments, $24,000 for vehicle insurance, and $38,000 for miscellaneous expenses." A collective gasp swept through the church hall. Some guests exchanged looks of amazement. Others pulled out calculators on their phones to check the numbers. Sarah's mother, who had remained seated at the head table throughout the confrontation, slowly stood up, her face completely white. Furthermore, David continued without mercy, "Mrs. Stone personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the church hall, food, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of $67,000. Money which, as I mentioned earlier, is no longer available to cover these expenses." Sarah finally found her voice, but what came out was more of a wail than real words. "This is impossible. It's a lie. No one can have so much money and live like a poor person." She turned to the guests as if looking for support, but found only fascinated faces, and some who were clearly enjoying her desperation. "My dear Sarah," I said with a calm that contrasted dramatically with her panic, "you have just learned a very valuable lesson about judging people by their appearances. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband Thomas and I valued privacy above showing off. It turned out to be a very wise decision." Michael finally reacted, approaching me with hesitant steps. "Mom, please, there has to be an explanation. There has to be a way to resolve this. You can't destroy my life like this." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I felt a pang of motherly pain that almost made me waver. "Destroy your life," I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me again. "I'm destroying your life. Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word while I was being shamed? Wasn't it you who planned to take my home from me?" The truth of my words rang through the church hall like church bells. Several guests nodded, clearly remembering the scene that had started all this drama. Some even had videos on their phones of the slap Sarah had given me, digital proof of the cruelty that had triggered this revelation. "But that was different," Michael mumbled, though his voice lacked conviction. "We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help." His excuses sounded pathetic even to himself, and I could see some guests exchanging looks of disgust. "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice rising for the first time all night. "You didn't know you were planning a family attack to pressure me into selling my home? You didn't know you had brought a house appraiser without my knowledge? You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me unable to think properly if I didn't cooperate?" With each question, Michael's posture shrank smaller. David took advantage of the moment to pull another paper from his folder. "Mr. Stone, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to change her will. All assets that were previously designated for you to inherit have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse." The impact of this declaration was like a silent explosion. Sarah staggered backward as if she had been physically hit. "You can't do that," she shrieked, her mask of composure finally falling completely. "We're your family. Michael is your only son. You can't take away his inheritance over a stupid fight." "A stupid fight?" I repeated, letting the words hang in the tension-filled air. "Is that how you describe a family conspiracy to take an old woman's home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on her wedding day?" My voice had turned icy, and I could see some guests flinch. Sarah's father, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally approached with an expression of poorly hidden panic. "Mrs. Stone, I think we're all a little upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down." His tone was that of a man who had just realized he had bet on the wrong horse. "There's nothing to discuss in private," I replied firmly. "Everything I had to say has been said here in front of the same people who witnessed my shame. You chose to make this public, so my response will be public." The guests' heads moved between us as if watching a tennis match, absorbed in every exchange. David closed his folder with a dry snap that echoed throughout the church hall. "Mrs. Stone, all papers have been delivered and explained. The legal effects will begin immediately." He turned to Michael and Sarah with a professional expression, but not without a certain satisfaction. "I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible." And with that, the truth was finally revealed to all.